Story 1. The Tracks That Circled. My name is David Mercer, and I lived alone in a cabin in northern Maine, about 40 miles from the Canadian border. I'd moved there in October 2018, looking for solitude after a difficult divorce. The cabin was isolated, sitting on 80 acres of dense forest, the nearest neighbor 5 miles away. It was exactly what I needed: peace, quiet, and distance from everything that had gone wrong in my life. I was a freelance software developer, so I could work from anywhere with an internet connection. The cabin had satellite internet, a wood stove, a backup generator, and enough supplies to last through the brutal Maine winter. I'd grown up in rural Vermont, so I wasn't naive about winter isolation. I knew what I was getting into, or so I thought. The first snow came in late November, just a dusting that made the forest look peaceful and clean. By mid-December, we'd had several significant storms, and the snow was consistently 3 feet deep. I'd settled into a comfortable routine: work during the day, read at night, chop wood when needed, and enjoy the absolute silence that only a snow-covered forest can provide. On January 8, 2019, I woke at 6:30 a.m. to fresh snow. About 4 inches had fallen overnight, covering the older, crusty snow with a pristine white blanket. I made coffee and stood at my kitchen window, watching the gray dawn light filter through the trees. That's when I saw the tracks. They started at the edge of the tree line, maybe 50 yards from my cabin, and they circled the entire structure. A complete loop around my cabin, perfectly spaced about 15 feet from the walls, forming an unbroken ring in the fresh snow. I put on my boots and coat and went outside to investigate. The tracks were strange. They looked vaguely like footprints, but wrong. Each print was roughly the size of a human foot, maybe slightly larger, but the shape was off. The toes, if they were toes, were too long and spaced too far apart, and there were only 4 of them instead of 5. The heel was narrow, almost pointed. What disturbed me most was the stride length. The distance between prints was enormous, at least 6 feet. Whatever made these tracks was either incredibly tall or was taking huge, leaping steps. I followed the circle around my cabin. The tracks never deviated, never broke the pattern. They started at the tree line on the north side, circled completely around, and then headed back into the forest on the same north side, disappearing into the dense pines. I grabbed my phone and took photos. I'd done enough hiking to recognize animal tracks: deer, moose, bear, coyote. These matched nothing I'd ever seen. The prints were too deliberate, too evenly spaced, and the circle was too perfect. Animals don't move that way. I tried to tell myself it was a person, maybe a hiker who'd gotten lost, circled my cabin looking for signs of life, then moved on. But the stride length made no sense for a human. And why circle without approaching the door or knocking for help? I went back inside and did some research online, looking at tracks of native Maine animals, even checking for rare species. Nothing matched. I posted the photos to a wildlife forum, asking for identification. The responses ranged from suggestions about deformed moose prints to accusations that I'd faked the photos. One person suggested they looked like tracks from a prehistoric bird, which was obviously impossible. That night, I couldn't sleep well. I kept getting up to check the windows, looking out into the darkness, seeing nothing but snow and trees. Around 2 a.m., I heard something outside, not footsteps exactly, more like a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled through the snow. I turned on the cabin's exterior lights. They illuminated about 30 feet in each direction, creating islands of light in the darkness. I saw nothing moving. The sound stopped. I stood at the window for 20 minutes watching, barely breathing. Nothing appeared. Eventually, I convinced myself it was snow sliding off the roof or a branch breaking under ice weight. I went back to bed but didn't really sleep, just dozed fitfully. Morning came gray and cold. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, another 3 inches. I looked out the window and my stomach dropped. New tracks. Another perfect circle around my cabin, this time closer. The prints were now only about 10 feet from my walls. And there was something else. The tracks had changed. They were deeper, more pronounced, like whatever made them was pressing harder into the snow, or was heavier than before. I didn't go outside immediately. I stood at the window studying the tracks, trying to understand. The stride length was the same, still those impossible 6-foot gaps between prints. But now I could see details I'd missed before. There were drag marks between some of the prints, thin lines in the snow as if something was being dragged or as if the thing's feet weren't fully lifting between steps. I called the sheriff's office in the nearest town. The dispatcher listened to my story with obvious skepticism. "Sir, you're reporting unusual tracks around your cabin?" "Yes, they're not from any animal I recognize. They've appeared 2 nights in a row circling my property." "Have you seen anything? Any actual creature or person?" "No, just the tracks." "Well, Mr. Mercer, unless you see an actual threat or crime being committed, there's not much we can do. You're in remote territory, lots of wildlife, could be anything. These aren't normal animal tracks. If you feel threatened, you can come stay in town until spring. Otherwise, keep your doors locked and maybe get a hunting rifle for peace of mind." She clearly thought I was paranoid or attention-seeking. I thanked her and hung up, feeling foolish but also increasingly anxious. I spent that day working, or trying to work, but constantly checking the windows. The forest was absolutely still. No wind, no movement. Just snow and trees and silence. As dusk approached, I made a decision. I set up my video camera on a tripod in the upstairs window, positioning it to record a good angle on the north side of the cabin where the tracks always started. I set it to night vision mode and started recording. If something came tonight, I'd have proof. I also did something that felt dramatic but necessary. I loaded my grandfather's old Winchester rifle and kept it near the door. Night fell. I kept the interior lights low so the camera would have better visibility outside. I sat in the darkened living room watching through the window, occasionally checking the camera's viewfinder to ensure it was still recording. Around 10 p.m., the temperature dropped noticeably. I could feel it even inside the well-insulated cabin, a sudden deep cold that made the wood stove work harder. My breath became visible in the air near the windows. At 10:47 p.m., I heard it again. That dragging sound, but closer now, and with it something else, breathing. Heavy, labored breathing, but wrong somehow. The rhythm was off, too many breaths per cycle. Instead of inhale, exhale, it sounded like inhale, inhale, exhale, exhale. I moved to the window slowly, quietly. The exterior lights were off so as not to interfere with the camera's night vision. In the darkness, I could barely see anything except the vague shapes of trees against slightly lighter snow. Then I saw movement. Something was at the tree line just at the edge of my vision. It was tall, extremely tall, maybe 8 feet. The shape was humanoid but too thin, the proportions all wrong. The limbs were too long, especially the legs. It moved forward into my property with that strange gait I'd deduced from the tracks, huge steps, something dragging between them. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I watched as the thing began its circle around my cabin. It moved slowly, deliberately, always maintaining that same distance. When it passed through a patch where snow reflected slightly more light, I saw its silhouette more clearly. It walked on 2 legs, but they bent wrong, like they had an extra joint. The arms hung down to almost knee level, if it had knees in any conventional sense. The head was the worst part, elongated, almost cone-shaped, with what might have been antlers or horns or just branches, I couldn't tell. It completed half the circle before I lost sight of it around the cabin's south side, I ran to the opposite window trying to catch another glimpse, but by the time I got there, it was already moving past, heading around to complete its circuit. The breathing sound continued throughout, that strange double rhythm that made my skin crawl. And now there was something else. A smell. Even through the closed windows and doors, I could smell it, like decay, like something that had been dead and frozen and was now thawing. Rot and cold mixed together. I grabbed my camera from where I'd been trying to take photos through the window, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold it steady. The thing completed its circle and moved back toward the tree line. I watched it disappear into the forest, its impossibly tall form seeming to simply melt into the darkness between trees. The breathing sound faded. The smell lingered. I immediately checked my video camera. It had recorded everything. My hands shook as I rewound the footage and played it back. The night vision showed the tree line clearly in shades of green and gray. At 10:47, exactly when I'd heard the first sounds, something emerged from the trees. The video captured it clearly, and what I saw made me feel physically ill. It was definitely real, not a hallucination. The creature was massive, over 8 feet tall, with a body that looked emaciated, almost skeletal. Its skin or fur or whatever covered it was white or gray, nearly the color of snow. The legs were digitigrade like a dog's hind legs, but scaled up to something enormous. The feet matched the tracks exactly. 4 long, separated digits with pointed heels. But the worst part was the head. It wasn't a deer skull or moose skull or anything I recognized. The shape was wrong, too narrow, with a jaw that extended forward in a pronounced snout or muzzle. And the antlers weren't antlers. They were too thin, too many branches growing from the skull in all directions like a crown of thorns. The thing circled my cabin in the video exactly as I'd witnessed. Its movements were fluid but alien, each step covering that impossible distance. Between steps, I could see what created the drag marks, its knuckles. The creature's arms were so long that when it walked upright, its hands dragged on the ground between steps. The video clearly showed it stop once during its circuit, facing directly toward my window. Toward me. It stood motionless for nearly 30 seconds, and even in night vision I could see that its eyes reflected the camera's infrared light. They glowed with a pale, cold luminescence. Then it continued its circle and disappeared back into the forest. I watched the video 3 times, taking screenshots, saving multiple copies to different devices. This was evidence. This was proof of something unknown, something that shouldn't exist. I tried the sheriff's office again. This time I got a different dispatcher, a man who listened more carefully. "Sir, you're saying you have video of an unknown creature?" "Yes, clear footage. This thing is real and it's circling my cabin every night." "What do you want us to do?" "Send someone out here. Look at the footage. Look at the tracks. This is something significant." "Mr. Mercer, we're a small sheriff's office in rural Maine. We handle domestic disputes, drunk drivers, and the occasional drug case. We don't have resources for—" "What are you suggesting? A cryptozoology investigation?" "I'm suggesting that there's something dangerous on my property, and I'm a taxpayer requesting help." He sighed. "Look, I'll make a note in the log. If a deputy is in your area, maybe they'll swing by. But honestly, you're 40 miles from town. We can't justify sending someone out there because of weird tracks and a video that could be anything." "It's not anything. It's something real and unknown." "Then call a wildlife expert or a university. We can't help you." He hung up. I was alone with this thing. I spent the rest of that night awake, rifle across my lap, watching the windows. The creature didn't return, but I heard sounds in the forest. Branches breaking, that strange breathing, and once, a sound like vocalization. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream, but something between them, a call or a warning. When dawn finally came, I went outside despite my fear. New tracks circled my cabin even closer than before. Now they were only 5 feet from my walls. At this rate, tomorrow they'd be at my door. And there was something new. At the point where the tracks returned to the forest, something had been left in the snow. I approached carefully, rifle ready. It was bones. A collection of small bones, rabbit, squirrel, bird, arranged in a pattern. Not random, not scattered by a predator. Arranged, in a circle, like a message or a warning or an offering. I packed immediately: essential clothes, laptop, important documents, some food. I loaded my truck and prepared to leave. Whatever this thing was, I wasn't staying to find out what happened when its circles finally reached my door. Before I left, I posted the video online to multiple platforms, forums, cryptozoology sites, even sent it to several universities. I wanted people to see what I'd seen, to know that something unknown was in those Maine woods. The responses were mixed. Some people believed me, others claimed it was elaborate CGI or a person in a suit. Several experts analyzed the video and couldn't find evidence of fakery, but also couldn't identify what the creature was. A few suggested it might be a diseased moose or a bear with severe mange, but the body structure didn't match any known animal. I never went back to that cabin. I couldn't. I rented a place in town and eventually moved back to civilization, to a city where you're never really alone, where there are always lights and people and nothing unknown can circle your home in the darkness. But I still have nightmares about those tracks. About that creature moving in its deliberate circle, getting closer each night. I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed one more night. Would it have reached my door? Would it have tried to get inside? What did it want? And I wonder if it's still there, still circling that empty cabin, still leaving bones and patterns I couldn't understand. Still waiting for someone to return. Sometimes I think about the next person who might rent or buy that property, who might wake up one winter morning to find strange tracks in the snow. I hope they have the sense to leave quickly. I hope they don't stay to find out what happens when the circles finally close, because something is out there in the Maine wilderness. Something that watches and circles and leaves messages in bone. Something that moves through the snow with impossible strides and breathes with a rhythm that isn't quite alive. And somewhere in my mind I can still hear that sound, still smell that decay, still see those pale eyes reflecting light in the darkness, watching from just beyond the trees, patient and cold and utterly inhuman. Story 2. The Snow Voices. Elena Vasiliev had grown up in Siberia before immigrating to Canada at age 25. She was now 42, living in a small town in the Yukon territory called Dawson City, working as a translator and teaching Russian language courses online. She'd chosen the Yukon specifically because the landscape reminded her of home, vast, cold, and unforgiving. She respected winter in a way that people from warmer climates never could. She knew how to survive in extreme cold, how to read snow conditions, how to avoid frostbite and hypothermia. Her house was on the outskirts of Dawson City, a sturdy log structure she'd helped build herself. It sat on a hill overlooking the frozen Yukon River, with forest behind it and the town visible in the distance. She had neighbors, but the nearest was half a mile away. It was private but not dangerously isolated. February 2021 brought the worst cold snap the Yukon had seen in 30 years. Temperatures dropped to minus 55 degrees Celsius, cold enough that exposed skin would freeze in less than 2 minutes. Elena stayed inside mostly, only venturing out to retrieve firewood from her shed or to clear snow from her roof. The voices started on February 9th, the third day of the extreme cold. Elena was working at her computer, translating a technical manual from Russian to English, when she heard someone calling her name outside. Elena Vasiliev. It was a woman's voice, clear and distinct despite the wind. Elena went to her window and looked out. Nothing but snow and trees and the pale winter sun low on the horizon. No one was outside. She opened her door carefully. At -55, you didn't keep doors open long. Hello? Who's there? No answer. Just wind and cold. Elena closed the door, confused. She definitely heard her name. The voice had been clear, speaking with a Russian accent similar to her own. She returned to work, but 15 minutes later she heard it again. Elena, come outside, Elena, I need help. This time the voice was urgent, frightened. Elena grabbed her heaviest parka and went outside, calling out, Where are you? Do you need help? The cold was staggering, painful even through her thick clothing. She scanned the area, looking for anyone who might be in trouble. Nothing. No footprints in the snow except her own from earlier trips to the shed. No sign of any person. Hello? She called again, voice muffled by her scarf. Down here. Help me. I'm down here. The voice seemed to come from the direction of the frozen river. Elena felt a spike of alarm. If someone had fallen through the ice, they'd die within minutes in this temperature. She started down the hill toward the river, moving as fast as she could in deep snow. Keep talking, I'm coming, Elena shouted. Hurry, so cold, help me, Elena. Elena reached the river's edge. The ice was solid, several feet thick. It would take a vehicle to break through at this temperature. There was no hole, no break in the surface, and still no person visible anywhere. Where are you exactly? Elena called out, now deeply confused and starting to feel the cold penetrating her clothes. Here, Elena, right here. The voice came from directly in front of her, seemingly from the ice itself. Elena looked down at the frozen river surface and saw something that made her breath catch. There was a face under the ice, not just under it, in it. A woman's face, frozen into the ice itself, looking up at her. The features were clear, dark hair, pale skin, wide eyes. The mouth was open as if screaming or calling out. Elena stumbled backward, almost falling. She heard the voice again, but now she realized it was coming from all around her, not from any specific direction. Help me, Elena, I'm so cold, it hurts, please help me. Elena ran. She scrambled back up the hill to her house, fell once, got up, kept running. She got inside and slammed the door, her heart pounding, breath coming in gasps. The cold had penetrated deep. Her face was numb, fingers aching even through thick gloves. She went back to the window and looked down at the river. From this distance, she couldn't see any face in the ice. Just smooth, white surface. Elena tried to rationalize what she'd seen. The cold could cause hallucinations. Severe temperature could affect the brain, create visions. But the voice had been so real, so clear. And that face in the ice. She made tea with shaking hands and tried to return to work. But every few minutes she'd hear the voice again, muffled now as if coming from outside. Elena, why didn't you help me? So cold. Please. It continued all evening. Sometimes it was the woman's voice. Sometimes it was a man's voice, also speaking Russian, also calling her name. Sometimes it was children's voices, multiple children, all crying and calling for help. Elena turned on music, put in headphones, tried to drown out the voices. But she could still hear them underneath, calling from outside, calling her name, begging for help. She didn't sleep that night. Every time she started to drift off, the voices would intensify, pulling her back to consciousness. By morning, she was exhausted and beginning to doubt her sanity. She called her friend Maria, another Russian immigrant who lived in town. Maria, I need to ask you something strange. Have you been hearing voices in the cold? Voices? What do you mean? People calling out, asking for help, saying names. A pause. Elena, have you been outside too long? Cold can make you hear things that aren't there. I know that, But these are so clear, so specific, they know my name. Wind through trees can sound like voices, or maybe your neighbors. My nearest neighbor is half a mile away. Then it's probably just the cold affecting you. Stay inside, stay warm. This temperature isn't natural. After hanging up, Elena felt both reassured and more isolated. Maybe it was just the cold. Maybe her mind was playing tricks. But at noon, she looked out her window and saw someone standing at the edge of the forest behind her house. A woman in a white dress, bare feet in the snow, dark hair hanging loose. She was staring directly at Elena's window. Elena blinked, and the woman was gone. She appeared again an hour later in a different location. This time, closer to the house. Same white dress, same impossible bare feet in -55-degree cold. Elena grabbed her camera and took photos through the window. When she looked at them, the woman appeared in each shot, but blurry, indistinct, like a double exposure. And in one photo, Elena could see that the woman was partially transparent. Trees were visible through her body. That night, the voices came from all around the house. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all speaking Russian, all calling Elena's name, all begging for help. "Let us in, Elena, we're so cold, please, we're freezing, open the door, just for a moment, we need warmth. Please, Elena, we're dying out here." Elena sat in the center of her living room, hands over her ears, trying not to listen. But the voices penetrated everything, coming through the walls, through the floor, even seeming to echo inside her own head. She looked up old Siberian folklore on her laptop, searching for anything that might explain this. She found stories about Zimny Duki, winter spirits, entities that appeared during extreme cold, voices of people who'd frozen to death in previous winters. According to the legends, they would call to the living, trying to lure them outside to freeze and join them. The stories said they couldn't enter a home unless invited. They could only call, only tempt, only try to convince the living to come out into the killing cold. Elena remembered her grandmother telling her such stories when she was a child in Siberia. She thought they were just fairy tales, warnings to keep children from wandering off in winter. But now, sitting in her house while hundreds of voices called her name, she wondered if the stories had been true. The siege lasted 4 days. 4 days of voices calling constantly, faces appearing at the edge of her vision. The woman in white standing in different locations around her property. Elena kept her doors and windows locked, her wood stove burning, her lights on even during the day. She stopped sleeping more than an hour at a time. The exhaustion made everything worse. She couldn't tell anymore what was real and what was hallucination. Were the voices getting louder? Were there actually people outside, or were they ghosts or spirits or products of her deteriorating mental state? On the 4th night, the temperature rose slightly to -45 degrees. The voices changed. They became angry. "Why won't you help us, Elena? We're suffering. You have warmth, you have shelter. Share it, open your door, let us in. Just for a moment. You're selfish, you're cruel, we're dying because of you." The guilt was overwhelming. Part of Elena's mind understood this was manipulation, but another part felt genuine anguish. If people were really freezing outside, wasn't she obligated to help? She went to her door with her hand on the knob, actually starting to turn it when something stopped her. A memory of her grandmother's stern face telling her, "Never open the door for winter voices. They're not what they seem. They're not who they claim to be." Elena released the doorknob and backed away. The voices screamed, a chorus of fury that shook her windows, rattled her doors. Then suddenly silence. Elena waited, breathing hard, listening. Nothing. The voices were gone. She went to the window and looked out. The woman in white was standing directly outside, close enough that Elena could see her face clearly. She was beautiful and terrible. Her skin blue-white with cold, her eyes completely black. Her mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, and a sound came out. Not quite a scream, not quite words, something that made Elena's bones ache with cold just hearing it. Then the woman vanished. Simply disappeared like she'd never been there. The next morning, the temperature rose to -35 degrees. Still dangerously cold, but the worst of the cold snap was over. Elena finally slept, exhausted beyond measure. When she woke 12 hours later, she checked outside. The snow around her house was marked with footprints, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all bare feet, all circling her house in complex patterns. But there were no tracks leading to or away from the property. The prints simply appeared in a circle around her home and went nowhere. Elena took photos, documented everything, then called Maria to come help her. Together they examined the footprints more closely. Maria, who'd been skeptical on the phone, went pale when she saw them. "This isn't natural," Maria whispered. "These aren't from people. Look at the toes. There are too many." Elena counted. Maria was right. Each footprint had 7 toes. They called the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. An officer came out, looked at the prints, took photos, and filed a report classifying the incident as unusual wildlife activity. He suggested the prints might be from wolverines or some other animal. The fact that they looked like human feet with 7 toes was noted but not explained. Elena never learned what the voices really were. She researched similar incidents and found scattered reports throughout Arctic regions, Siberia, northern Canada, Alaska, Scandinavia, of people experiencing winter voices during extreme cold. Most were dismissed as hallucinations caused by cold-induced stress. Some resulted in tragedies, people who went outside in response to the voices and froze to death. She continued living in the Yukon but moved into town, into an apartment building where she was surrounded by neighbors. She never spent another winter alone, but sometimes on the coldest nights when the temperature drops below -40 and the wind howls through Dawson City's streets, Elena hears them. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. The voices calling in Russian, speaking her name, asking for help. She never answers. She keeps her doors locked, her windows closed, and reminds herself that some things in the winter darkness are not what they seem. Some voices should never be answered, no matter how desperate they sound, because the cold up there doesn't just kill, it remembers. It keeps, and it calls. Story 3. The Breathing Snow. Thomas Morrison was a wildlife biologist conducting a winter study on wolf populations in northern Minnesota. He'd been assigned to a remote research station in the Superior National Forest, monitoring wolf pack movements using radio telemetry and motion-activated cameras. It was January 2022, and Thomas had been at the station for 3 weeks, living alone in a small cabin designed for single researcher occupancy. At 36 years old, Thomas had extensive field experience. He'd worked in Alaska, Montana, and Canada on various wildlife projects. Isolation didn't bother him. He actually preferred it to the politics and paperwork of university life. Out here, it was just him, the wolves, and the forest. The research station sat in a clearing about 15 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by snowmobile in winter. Thomas checked in via satellite phone every 3 days with his supervisor at the university. He had supplies for 2 months, backup communications, emergency equipment, and detailed protocols for every conceivable situation. What he didn't have protocols for was the snow that started breathing. It began on January 23rd. Thomas had been out checking his camera traps, collecting data from the motion sensors he'd placed along wolf trails. It was a clear day, temperature around -20 Fahrenheit, perfect conditions for winter fieldwork. He was about half a mile from the station when he noticed something odd about the snow. It was moving, not wind-driven movement. Thomas knew what that looked like. This was different. The snow surface was rising and falling in a regular rhythm, like something breathing underneath it. A circular area about 10 feet in diameter, the snow lifting up several inches, then settling, then lifting again. Thomas approached carefully. His first thought was that an animal was trapped under the snow, maybe injured. A deer or even a wolf could have fallen into a depression and been covered by recent snowfall. But as he got closer, he realized the movement was wrong for a struggling animal. It was too regular, too rhythmic. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. The snow rose and fell like a chest, like lungs expanding and contracting. Thomas used his probe pole to carefully test the snow. It was just snow. No hollow space beneath, no trapped animal, just solid snow all the way down to frozen ground about 4 feet down. But the surface continued its rhythmic movement. He took video with his phone documenting the phenomenon. The footage clearly showed the snow rising and falling, the movement undeniable. He took temperature readings, checked for geothermal activity that might cause the snow to shift, looked for any logical explanation. Nothing made sense. After 20 minutes of observation, Thomas marked the location with a GPS waypoint and returned to his station. He reviewed the video that night, trying to convince himself it was some kind of optical illusion or wind effect. But the breathing pattern was clear. Something was making the snow move like lungs. He reported it during his next check-in with his supervisor, Dr. Patricia Chen. "You're saying the snow was moving like it was breathing?" "Yes. Steady rhythm, rising and falling, approximately 15 cycles per minute. That's respiratory rate for a large mammal. You're sure nothing was underneath?" "I probed down to frozen ground. Just snow. Could be settling patterns or wind creating a resonance effect. Document it if you see it again, but I wouldn't worry too much. You see strange things in extreme environments." Thomas accepted that explanation, but he wasn't convinced. He'd spent enough time in winter conditions to recognize normal snow behavior. This wasn't it. The next day, he found 3 more breathing spots, all within a quarter-mile of his station, all showing the same steady rhythm. Thomas checked each one carefully. Nothing underneath, no explanation, just snow that rose and fell like something alive. By the 4th day, there were a dozen breathing spots scattered around the research station. They appeared in different locations each day, sometimes replacing ones from the previous day, sometimes in completely new areas. Always that same steady 15 breaths per minute rhythm. Thomas began to notice a pattern in their placement. They formed a rough circle around his station like they were surrounding him. Not threatening exactly, but definitely arranged in a deliberate pattern. On January 28th, Thomas heard it for the first time. He was inside the station at night writing up his field notes when he heard breathing. Not wind, not equipment. Actual breathing. The sound of air being drawn in and expelled, rhythmic and steady. It was coming from outside. Thomas went to the window and looked out into the darkness. His exterior lights illuminated about 40 feet in each direction. In that pool of light, he could see multiple patches of snow rising and falling in sync, all breathing together, all at the same rate, like they were connected. The sound was louder now that he was listening for it. A deep, slow inhalation, then a slower exhalation. It surrounded the station, coming from all directions. Thomas's scientific training told him there had to be an explanation. Some geological process, some atmospheric effect, something that mimicked breathing but was entirely natural. But another part of his mind, a more primitive part, was screaming that something was wrong. He checked his wolf telemetry equipment. None of his radio-collared wolves were in the immediate area. They'd all moved north about a week ago, following prey herds. He pulled up data from his motion-activated cameras. Nothing. No animals approaching the station, no movement except wind-blown branches. but the breathing continued, audible even through the cabin's insulated walls. Thomas tried to sleep but couldn't. The breathing was too present, too rhythmic. It sounded like the forest itself was alive, lungs expanding and contracting all around him. Morning brought a disturbing discovery. Thomas stepped outside to check his equipment and realized the breathing spots had multiplied overnight. There were now dozens of them, possibly hundreds, stretching as far as he could see into the forest. The entire landscape looked like it was breathing, snow rising and falling in waves. He took more video, more photos, documented everything. Then he tried his satellite phone to report this to Dr. Chen. The phone showed no signal. He tried multiple times, moved to different locations around the station. Nothing. His backup radio showed similar problems, nothing but static on all frequencies. Thomas was isolated. No communication, surrounded by an impossible phenomenon 15 miles from the nearest road. He decided to wait it out. He had supplies, shelter, heat. Whatever this was, it couldn't last forever. Probably some freak weather pattern or atmospheric condition that was interfering with both the snow and his communications. But that night, the breathing changed. It got faster. Instead of 15 breaths per minute, it accelerated to 20, then 25, then 30. The snow rose and fell more rapidly, and the sound grew louder. Thomas could feel vibrations through the cabin floor, like the ground itself was breathing. Then he heard the voice. It came from outside, from the breathing snow. A voice that sounded like wind through a cavern but formed recognizable words. Thomas Morrison, come outside." He froze, listening. The voice came again, layered over the breathing sounds. "We know you're there. We can feel you. Come outside, Thomas. Join the breathing." Thomas checked all his doors and windows, making sure everything was locked. He closed his curtains, not wanting to see the breathing snow anymore, but he could still hear it, that accelerating rhythm and the voice calling his name. "You study us. You watch us. Now we watch you. Come outside. Become part of the breathing." Hours passed. The breathing rhythm continued to accelerate. By midnight, it was up to 60 breaths per minute, fast and panicked, like something hyperventilating. The sound was overwhelming, and Thomas realized he could no longer distinguish his own breathing from the sound surrounding him. Was he breathing in sync with the snow? Was the snow matching his breath? He couldn't tell anymore. The voice continued. "You're already part of it. Your breath is our breath. Your lungs are our lungs. Come outside and see. Come understand." Thomas put his hands over his ears, but it didn't help. The sound was everywhere, coming through the walls, through the floor, even seeming to resonate in his own chest. He could feel his heartbeat synchronizing with the rhythm, his breath matching the pattern. In desperation, he grabbed his emergency beacon, the device designed to signal for rescue in life-threatening situations. He activated it, knowing it would bring helicopters, rescue teams, and probably end his research project and possibly his career. But he didn't care anymore. He needed out. The beacon's light flashed, signal transmitting. Thomas waited, watching the device, praying it was working despite whatever was interfering with his other communications. The breathing stopped. Suddenly, completely, the sound cut off. Silence fell over the forest, so absolute that Thomas's ears rang from the absence of noise. He waited, not moving, barely breathing himself. Then his satellite phone rang. Thomas grabbed it, saw Dr. Chen's number. "Hello, Patricia? Thomas, your emergency beacon went off. What's wrong?" "The snow, it's breathing. There are voices. My communications have been down." "Thomas, slow down. Your communications? We've talked to you every scheduled check-in. You called yesterday." "No, I haven't spoken to you in 3 days. My phone hasn't worked." "Thomas, I have logs of our conversations. We spoke yesterday about your wolf tracking data. Are you feeling all right?" Thomas felt reality sliding away. I don't remember calling you yesterday. I think you need to come back to base. The isolation might be affecting you. It happens, nothing to be ashamed of. We'll send the snowmobile team to extract you in the morning. But the breathing? You need to send someone now to document. We'll talk about it when you get back. Turn off the emergency beacon if there's no immediate danger. Try to get some sleep. She hung up. Thomas stood in his cabin, phone in hand, confused and frightened. Had he been hallucinating? Had the isolation, the cold, the loneliness driven him to some kind of break with reality? He went to the window and looked outside. The snow was still, normal, not moving, not breathing. Just regular snow in a regular forest. But then he saw the footprints. They led from the tree line to his cabin door. Not animal prints, these were shaped like human feet, but enormous, each print easily 2 feet long. They approached his door, then circled his entire cabin multiple times, then returned to the forest. Thomas had been inside all day. He would have heard anyone approaching. But these prints were fresh, made in snow that had fallen only hours ago. He didn't sleep that night. He packed his emergency gear and waited for dawn and the rescue team. They arrived at 8:00 a.m. 2 researchers on snowmobiles, cheerful and casual, acting like this was a routine pickup. Ready to head back, Thomas? Did you see the footprints around the cabin? They looked confused. What footprints? Thomas went to show them, but the prints were gone. The snow around his cabin was undisturbed, smooth and pristine. He let them take him back to civilization without further comment. When he arrived at the university, Dr. Chen had him see a counselor who specialized in isolation-related psychological issues. Thomas went through the sessions, said what they wanted to hear, accepted that maybe he'd experienced some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But he kept the videos, the footage of breathing snow, the audio recordings of the voice calling his name. He watched them late at night, confirming to himself that it had been real, and he never went back to winter fieldwork. Because Thomas knows what he experienced wasn't hallucination. Something in that forest was alive in a way that science doesn't recognize. The snow itself had become aware, breathing, watching, calling. He still has nightmares about that breathing rhythm, about the voice in the snow. And sometimes on winter nights he checks his breathing, making sure it's his own rhythm, making sure he's not synchronized with something else, something vast and cold that breathes through the snow in remote forests, waiting for people foolish enough to be alone in the winter darkness, waiting to add their breath to its own, to make them part of the breathing, forever.